Hi folks, my name is Phil and welcome to Grounded, the series which looks at airlines of yesteryear. Once again, the holiday season is upon us, and in an effort to avoid the depressing subject of airline failures, this episode will take a look at Treasure Hunt. This episode isn't just a Christmas special, however. We're also celebrating the 40th anniversary of Treasure Hunt as it made its British television debut on Thursday the 28th of December 1982. Treasure Hunt was an adaptation of the French game show La Chasse au Trésor, or The Treasure Hunt in English, which made its debut a year earlier in 1981. It was the idea of Jacques Antoine, a man who had created some of the most popular game shows of the 1980s and 1990s, including Fort Boyard, Interceptor, and my personal favourite, The Crystal Maze. The programme would be produced by Chatsworth Television and would be broadcast on the still infant Channel 4, which itself had only begun broadcasting barely 2 months earlier. The premise was simple. 2 contestants located in a studio would solve cryptic clues and lead a Skyrunner across the game zone. The contestants would be given their first clue at the start. After solving this, they would lead the Skyrunner to where they believed the next clue lay, and hopefully it would be recovered, read, solved, and the process would repeat until the treasure was found. For each clue solved, the contestants would earn a cash prize, with £1,000 on offer for successfully completing the game. The contestants and the Skyrunner were up against a game clock, set at 45 minutes. The 45 minutes also included around 5 minutes thinking aloud time, where the contestants were given time to put together a plan, though this didn't stop contestants from sending the Skyrunner in completely the wrong direction. If they lost more than 5 minutes, then failure was almost certain. The game zone had a radius of roughly 25 miles, with the clues placed around 6 minutes flying time apart, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending upon how many clues were in that particular game zone. In the studio alongside the 2 contestants was host Kenneth Kendall, a former BBC newsreader and World War II veteran having served in the legendary Coldstream Guards. He would be assisted at the beginning of the programme by Anne Mayo, who would present the contestants with their first clue. Mayo would be replaced in the second series by Annette Linton in a new expanded role of adjudicator, in which she would give the occasional tip to the contestants if they were really struggling, and also keep them informed of the time remaining, as well as helping filling any silences with facts and trivia about the game area. She would wear an RAF-style uniform with 3 stripes, and while it looked very official, I think the top was perhaps a little too unbuttoned to be RAF approved. Linton would herself be replaced in the 3rd season by Wincey Willis, a weatherwoman from TVAM who would remain in the role until the end of the show's initial run. The Skyrunner was Anneka Rice. Born in Glamorgan, Wales in 1958, Rice would initially work for the BBC World Service before moving to Hong Kong, where she eventually found herself a regular role as an evening newsreader on an English-language channel. Interestingly, she would also dub kung fu films into English and even wrote a book called A Children's Guide to Hong Kong. Following her return to the UK in 1982, she joined Thames Television as a reporter and as a co-presenter on CBTV, a children's magazine programme stylised as a TV station within a TV station, before landing her role as Treasure Hunt's Skyrunner. Castle Air Charters of Liskeard, Cornwall would provide 2 helicopters for use in Treasure Hunt, G-SPEY and G-BHXU. Both were Jet Ranger 2s built under licence by Augusta of Italy in 1981. X-ray uniform would carry the Skyrunner along with the cameraman and AV technician, while Echo Yankee would be primarily used for communications, as well as providing some gratuitous air-to-air shots of the Skyrunner's helicopter. Echo Yankee would wear a very smart-looking dark green and gold livery. X-ray uniform would wear a white, yellow and golden brown livery, and when on treasure hunt duties would have small treasure hunt branding above the doors. Speaking of doors, when on game duties the helicopter would have both of its left-hand side doors removed, making it easier for the Skyrunner and crew to enter and exit at speed. It also allowed Anneka to lean out and talk to the camera. Notably, during a special episode from Series 3, which saw the roles reversed with Kenneth and Anneka playing as contestants, with various celebrities taking turns as the Skyrunner, Singer and songwriter Kenny Lynch really didn't like flying without a door, and at one point was caught muttering, "I just want to get out of this bloody helicopter." The Skyrunner helicopter X-ray uniform would be piloted by Keith Thompson, who along with the cameraman Graham Berry and technician Frank Mayborough would become very familiar to the audience during the show's run. The communications helicopter Echo Yankee was usually piloted by Michael Marrick Smith. Treasure Hunt was a very ambitious programme as it really pushed the technology of the day to its limits. Remember, this was the early 1980s and live outside broadcasts were still rare outside of news or sporting events. The equipment used was incredibly bulky. The Skyrunner was required to wear a huge radio pack and large pilot-style headset. The cameraman and technician would work together, almost joined at the hip with a cable connecting Graham's camera to Frank's recording equipment. The audio communications between the Skyrunner and the studio were live. The communications helicopter, which remained airborne during the game, would transmit the Skyrunner's audio to an outside broadcast vehicle, which would then transmit the signal to the studio via a combination of telephone lines, local telephone exchanges, and the post office tower. Episodes recorded further afield would also take advantage of microwave technology to beam the signal to London and keep the Skyrunner in real-time communications with the studio. The audio from the Skyrunner, along with that from the studio, was recorded and will be later mixed in with the video after recording. The video recorded when out and about was processed back in London, and after the game was over, it, along with the video recorded in the studio, would be cut and patched together to make a more streamlined show for the viewers, but more on that in a moment. One other important role that the second helicopter had was that of communicating with air traffic control. Echo Yankee would speak with ATC on behalf of the pair of choppers, relaying any requests or instructions between ATC and Keith in the Skyrunner helicopter. The Treasure Hunt aircraft were not given free rein to fly around willy-nilly. Any landing sites were arranged in advance during the episode's planning stages. VFR flight plans were filed in advance, but occasionally the contestants would send the Skyrunner in completely the wrong direction, and ATC would be required to authorise deviations. Planning an episode of Treasure Hunt was a very lengthy process. In fact, it takes the better part of a year to plan a 13-episode season. The early planning stages begin around November when ideas for new locations are considered. Local maps and guidebooks are sourced and checked out to see what interesting sites are in the area. Even the local area tourist information offices are contacted to ask if they have any events taking place during the planned filming dates. By January, the team have a list of 15 locations which will need whittling down to 2. 2 of the production team begin an 8-week tour of the locations to check their suitability. Are they interesting? Where can the clues be placed? What would the route be? Most importantly though, is it safe for the helicopter and Skyrunner crew? By April, the scouting team have returned, having checked out all 15 potential game areas. They then pick their best 13 which will be used for that season. The producers will have now secured permission from the site owners to land on their property, as well as ensure their cooperation during Anneka's presence. Keith Thompson, Castle Air's chief pilot and co-founder, would also be in the process of contacting local aerodromes to get information on the facilities available and to also secure permission to use the airfields during filming. In May, the producer, director, researcher and clue writer are flown to each location by Keith, where they'll have the opportunity to test their ideas for each clue. The locations and filming dates are confirmed with various interested parties, such as the Civil Aviation Authority, local landowners and the local police constabulary. It's also during May that the final selection of the contestants is completed, 1 pair per programme, plus 1 additional couple to be on standby just in case 1 pair of contestants can't take part. Thousands of people write in and apply for a chance to take part. Those are whittled down to 250 pairs, who are then interviewed, with the successful applicants being chosen during the month. Filming begins in June and takes around 5 weeks to complete, with each episode requiring 2 days, a rehearsal day and the actual recording day. The day before filming, the producer would stand in for the Skyrunner, and along with the camera crew and helicopter crews, would test the ideal route of the game course. They would be checking for hazards to make sure that Anneka, Graham and Frank would not injure themselves while running the course. They would also be ensuring that the relevant folks on the ground were clued up to assist Anneka, but only if she asked for it. That said, there were countless occasions where Anneka was running round in front of puzzled onlookers who seemingly had no idea of what was going on. And as for not falling over, well, poor Anneka stacked it a fair few times during the show's run, including one memorable time in County Durham where she had to play ice hockey, fell over and proclaimed that "I've just broken my bottom."
Vellum from his holy
Listen, I've just broken my bottom. Thank you very much. Do you want your ball back?
It's a puck. It's a puck.
Is it present?
There's another one on the other side.
A puck. I've got my puck. Thanks, lads.
Anneka wouldn't be involved in the rehearsals during that first day. Instead, she would be confined to a hotel where she would read up on the local area in order to give herself some random facts and info to help fill in silences during the helicopter ride. Rehearsals would also be taking place in London. While there wouldn't be a Skyrunner, the two contestants would have a run through of what to expect during the show. They would also be reminded that there were no second chances, as everything was to be done in one take. The filming would be completed by August, and each episode would be put together, with the studio and Skyrunner footage being spliced together into a much more streamlined episode for the viewer. The entire series would be complete by the end of November and then handed to Channel 4 in December, ready for broadcasting later that month. Before you think everyone gets to take a break, don't forget that the research and planning stages begin in November, so the process has already begun for the next series. The first episode of Treasure Hunt would take place in Bali, where the helicopters and pilots being provided locally. One logistical issue was that the studio was in London, and due to the time difference between the UK and Indonesia, the studio segments were recorded in the early hours of the morning. The studio itself was specially constructed for the pilot episode and looked absolutely nothing like the one we would become familiar with. The time difference between the studio and Skyrunner would become a recurring issue, as the first episode of each series took place overseas, from Sydney to Switzerland, Florida to New Zealand, with the odd mid-season trip too. The contestants didn't win during that pilot episode, however, the show did, as it got picked up for a full 12-episode season, with the final episode being a clip show. The studio was rebuilt, and while it still didn't quite look as homey as the later versions, it was an improvement on the one used during the pilots. The studio would have bookshelves lined with plenty of books, all relevant to the local area as well as some general knowledge, and they were there to assist the contestants. While Kenneth Kendall insisted that he didn't know anything about that day's game, he did develop a strange habit of pulling out books randomly which put contestants back on the right path. Locations in that first series included Speyside, Suffolk, Powys, London and the Lake District, with the final location being Singapore. The first series ran from the 28th of December 1982 until the 17th of March 1983. It was a near-instant success, with a second series going into production right away to begin airing in January 1984. Treasure Hunt was a big hit, in no small part down to Anneka's honestly endearing personality. Even when she was running round seemingly like a headless chicken, either shouting hello or asking random passers-by about a clue, she was very entertaining to watch, and I'll admit that when I was a youngster she was my first crush. Anneka would have to partake in a lot of activities to either get a clue or to recover the treasure, be it playing ice hockey as mentioned earlier, participating in a rugby match, paddling a surfboard out to sea to recover sunken treasure off Cornwall, swinging on a trapeze, or one that I would certainly be able to do, fill and drink a jug of homebrew over in Shropshire. Another one that was right up my alley was when Anneka visited Bronte Country in 1988 and rode on the footplate of a steam locomotive from Haworth to Oakworth, although I'm a diesel driver myself. One that I personally would be less inclined to do, however, would be inspecting kilts up in the Isle of Skye, even after a jug of homebrew. Cameraman Graham got in on the act too in the Cotswolds episode from 1988, where after Anneka successfully reached the treasure, a yard of ale, a bonus was offered if Graham could drink said yard of ale in under 20 seconds. He did it in 5, and the contestants were given a very large bottle of champagne. Opportunities to jump out of the hovering helicopter and swim to a clue or treasure presented themselves a couple of times each series, and Anneka would dive right in, be it the cold waters off the Ayrshire coast, the warmer seas off New South Wales, or for a spot of scuba diving around the Channel Islands. In 1987, in the cold seas of Northumberland, she had to jump out of her helicopter and then be winched up into a Sea King search and rescue helicopter which held the final clue. One very notable moment came in 1986's visit to Devon, where Keith had to land X-ray uniform onto the deck of the HMS Olympus, a Royal Navy submarine which had surfaced in front of a very surprised Anneka. The landing was filmed both from the inside by Graham and from the chase helicopter, and sure made an interesting sight. The following year, a Harrier jump jet surprised Anneka during the Hertfordshire episode in a dramatic air-to-air shot, with the Harrier appearing from nowhere and flying alongside the Skyrunner's helicopter. The fighter pilot had the clue and would hand it over after landing. The next year, the world-famous Red Arrows blew past Anneka with their red, white and blue smoke before she landed and grabbed the clue from the squadron leader. In May 1988, a special episode of Treasure Hunt took place for the ITV Telethon. The history of the ITV Telethons are best left for someone like Bob to cover at some point, however. The episode and the hunt were broadcast live over a 27-hour period during the telethon. 5 pairs of celebrities would play as contestants and take turns in solving a clue. The clues themselves were scattered across the nation rather than a small area, and as a result the contestants were given 50 minutes per clue rather than the usual 45 minutes for the whole game. In effect, each clue was an episode of its own, with the Skyrunner relocating to a start position for each new clue off screen. Due to the distances involved between the game zones, the usual Skyrunner helicopter couldn't be used. Instead, a faster Augusta A109 was used. This aircraft, registration G-HELY, wore the same white, yellow and gold livery as X-ray uniform. Starting in Edinburgh, Anneka would work her way down from Scotland into Yorkshire and then the Midlands before reaching Brighton on the south coast and heading back north to London, finishing at the Blackheath Fair. The treasure was won with 1 minute and 14 seconds to spare, with the prize money going to charity. We didn't know it at the time, but that was the last time we would see Anneka take on her role of Skyrunner, as she stepped away from the role to have her first child. It was expected that she would return, however that was not to be. The 7th series of Treasure Hunt had quite a revamp: new glossy opening credits, a new Skyrunner and a new studio set. The opening credits were quite good, and the original Treasure Hunt theme, Peak Performance, was retained. The new studio set was required as the original studio site, the Limehouse Studios, was being demolished as part of the Docklands development. Wincey Willis pointed out the new studios during the opening to the first episode of the season, where Kenneth introduces our guest Skyrunner, Annabel Croft. A former tennis player, Croft was given the role of guest Skyrunner, as it was believed that she would only be in the role for the 7th series and would hand the role back over to Anneka. By the 2nd episode, the guest parts had been dropped, with Croft taking on the role full-time. She had the same energy as Anneka and really threw herself into the challenges to recover the clues during her time on the show. She seemed likeable enough, though whenever she was out and about searching for clues, people kept asking her, "Where's Anneka?" Despite still being one of Channel 4's most watched programmes, Chatsworth, the company responsible for Treasure Hunt, decided that the 7th series would be its last. Treasure Hunt was a very complicated and expensive programme to make, and they needed some of the resources elsewhere, but much more on that in a second. The final episode was broadcast on May the 18th, 1989. Okay, so assuming that I've not lost all of you yet, there is an epilogue to this story. First up, Chatsworth developed a new helicopter-themed show called Interceptor. This would be broadcast on the ITV network. Former Skyrunner Annabelle Croft would be the show's host. 2 contestants were dropped at random locations within a game zone and had to meet up with each other in order to unlock their backpack full of prize money. The caveat was that aside from the game timer working against them, they also had to avoid the Interceptor, who would try his damnedest to catch up with them and zap their backpacks locked. Castle Air again provided the helicopters, with the former Skyrunner helicopter, X-ray uniform, being used to transport the contestants to their starting locations. Another helicopter was introduced too. This was G-MEAN, and wore the menacing black and yellow livery of the Interceptor. This show only lasted 1 series, and has become a bit of a cult classic, mainly due to Sean O'Kane's exuberance as the Interceptor.
Anneka! Jesus! Kill! Over the fence, over the fence! He's behind me!
Anneka Rice returned to the TV with her own show, Challenge Anneka, which, not counting special episodes, ran for 7 seasons and is reportedly making a return to the screens in 2023. Speaking of returns, Treasure Hunt was revived in 2002. The premise was largely the same. A Skyrunner would be led across a game zone following more cryptic clues leading to treasure. The show would be hosted by newsreader Dermot Murnahan, with Susie Perry taking on the role of Skyrunner. There was no adjudicator in this series, which personally I think shifted the studio dynamic too far. Something else which I think spoiled the new show was that the Skyrunner could be tracked via GPS, meaning those in the studio knew exactly where she was, though fortunately they couldn't see a live video feed at least. Castle Air again provided helicopters for the new show, though the familiar X-ray uniform was absent, having ditched at sea north of Alderney in the summer of 1995. Fortunately, the 2 crew on board escaped unharmed, though the aircraft was lost. A new helicopter assumed the role of Skyrunner shuttle, G-ONTV, which wore a special livery of blue and white to match the newly revived Treasure Hunt's new colours. The first series of the new Treasure Hunt was filmed entirely in the southeast of England. However, every episode from the second series saw the Skyrunner at an overseas location. The second series, which consisted of 10 episodes, was filmed in New Zealand, Australia, Mexico and the United States. This revival of Treasure Hunt only lasted 2 seasons, and it was quietly dropped following the final episode of that second series, which was broadcast on the 2nd of August 2003. It's safe to say that Castle Air were the big winners from Treasure Hunt. They built a great reputation for their aerial work, finding themselves the #1 choice for the TV and film industry when it came to helicopter work. They're still around today, still working in TV of course, but are now also a big executive charter operator, as well as specialist in repairs, maintenance and sales of Augusta, now Leonardo, aircraft. On that happier ending, thanks for watching. I hope you've all had a great Christmas and wish you all a happy new year. I'd also like to thank you all for your support this year and hope to see you all again in 2023. I've got plenty more episodes in the works, so until next time, thanks for watching.